if you are stuck, if you're living with something that's not apparent and you're stuck, maybe you don't know how to advocate for yourself. Maybe you need to disclose in the workplace and are freaking out about that. Maybe you're diagnosed with something and you don't want to tell your friends or your family or your partner. Spend some time and some introspection as to what's holding you back.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all too human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. I am your host, Deanna, and whether this is your first time listening, you've been tuning in since the beginning, or something in between, I just want to say thank you. I am so grateful to have you along on this journey as we explore this very human, very universal experience of stuckness. And not only the different ways we can go about getting unstuck, but also how to tap into the gifts and lessons we can find in the stuckness. So thank you for being here and for being on this journey with me. So today we are going to talk about something that is a serious stuck point in my life and also the lives of many, many others. And that is my health. And more specifically, my chronic health issues. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I have 2 autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's, which impacts the thyroid, and rheumatoid arthritis, or RA, which impacts the joints. Both of these conditions can be serious, and they come with a host of challenging symptoms, from chronic pain to mobility issues to inflammation to brain fog to anxiety to so many more, all of which can make me feel stuck. Plus, there's this added layer of stuckness that stems from the fact that my conditions are, in large part, invisible. It's not like a broken leg, for example. When you look at me, it's not really apparent when I'm in pain or struggling or experiencing a flare-up. Even on my hardest days, you wouldn't necessarily know that there's anything wrong just by looking at me. The pain, the exhaustion, the confusion and lack of focus, those are all things that you can't see, but I can feel. And that is a weird feeling. It's hard to describe, but it can make me feel like I'm living in my own reality that's disconnected from everyone else's reality. And that can make me feel really isolated and very, very stuck. Now, full disclosure, it feels very vulnerable and kind of uncomfortable talking about all of this. My health, my autoimmune conditions, and the stuckness that I experience as a result. It brings up a lot of fear. Fear of judgments, fear that people will think of or treat me differently, fear that no one actually wants to hear about how I'm feeling or what I'm struggling with, fear that people won't believe me or think I'm exaggerating. The list goes on. But even though it feels vulnerable and uncomfortable to talk about my health, I also recognize that it's important to talk about it. Important at an individual level, a relational level, and really a societal level. Why? Because talking about it can make living with an invisible condition feel less isolating. It can forge a connection and understanding that can help you feel less stuck and alone. And it can also make other people feel less stuck and alone when they hear their own experience mirrored in your story. Talking more openly about invisible conditions can also help to address stigma in our culture, raise awareness, and educate people on what these conditions are and what it's like to live with them, all of which are critical for supporting the people living with these conditions, people like me, and ultimately helping them, or us, to get unstuck. And today's guest is on a mission to foster those conversations and make invisible conditions more visible. Tim Reitsma is the founder of the social impact project Invisible Condition and the host of the Invisible Condition podcast, a podcast that features personal stories of people living with invisible conditions. The podcast offers a way to elevate voices, educate others, encourage people to get curious, and to end the stigma of invisible conditions, chronic illness, disabilities, and diseases, one story at a time. During our conversation, Tim and I talk about the different ways living with an invisible condition can make you feel stuck, and how talking about it with the right people can help you get unstuck. We also talk about how to determine who the right people are, as well as the importance of self-compassion, the impact of the words we use and the stories we tell, both to ourselves and to others, and actionable strategies for working through the stuckness that can often come with living with invisible conditions. Whether you have an invisible condition yourself or you want to support someone you love, this is a chat that you don't want to miss. Let's jump into my conversation with Tim. Tim, welcome to Season of Stuck. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation then. Thanks for inviting me.
I am so excited to have this conversation. As someone that lives with invisible conditions myself, I think having a dialogue about what that actually means, what that experience is like, and how we can more effectively move through the stuckness that can often come with that is really important. So I really appreciate your mission and appreciate you being here to share it.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, as you know, and we're going to get into it. This thought, this idea, this life living with an invisible condition is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And it's something that we don't talk enough about, in my opinion. We're going to get into it. I love it.
Yes, I agree. I guess to get started, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us a little bit about your work and what inspired you to create Invisible Condition.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to share that. So I've founded a project. I'm calling it a project now because calling it a business felt too scary and I got stuck in it. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But the project, you can be found at invisiblecondition.com. It started with just a real desire to create some resources for people who, like myself, live with something that is not apparent. I live with Crohn's disease and arthritis. And if you looked at me, you'd think, oh, he's a quote unquote normal looking guy. But about a year and a half ago, from recording this, it was in 2022, 2023, I was so sick. My doctor said I was actually too sick for surgery. And it was at a time when things in my life completely changed. The job that I loved, it come to an end. And here I am being told that I need to get healthy enough for surgery. Talk about being stuck. I was at such a low point physically, spiritually, mentally, that I just didn't know what to do. And this job that ended, I was a podcast host and I loved podcasting. And so I thought I'm going to start a little project. So I launched invisiblecondition.com just really out of a release for myself. And I thought it was going to be a couple episodes with some friends and we're going to talk about our journey, but give people some action. Somebody who maybe is a caregiver, somebody who knows somebody with something that's not apparent, or for those of us who do live with something that's not apparent, some clear, actionable takeaways out of each episode. And before I knew it, I was so overwhelmed with guest outreaches, people reaching out saying, hey, I just want to tell my story. Now's the time to tell my story. And I got to a place where I became so overwhelmed trying to release an episode a week. And as trying to release episodes and releasing it as a hobby is effectively, it's I'm not making any money doing it, just became so overwhelming. So readjusted things. It's a project. It will become something bigger, but on my own terms. I release an episode every 2 weeks, release a newsletter every couple weeks. And now I partner with organizations to talk about the things that they're not talking about, which is disability inclusion. And so it's now opened up opportunities. And out of this idea of being stuck to now, okay, I think there's an opportunity here, not just for myself, but to bring a voice to people who might not have one.
Mm. And what I love about that mission is that by definition, living with an invisible condition means that it's not visible to other people. So, unless you're talking about it, unless there's a dialogue, no one really knows what's going on with you. And that can feel so isolating and so lonely. And so, having these conversations where you are bringing light to people's stories for them to share their experience and what they're going through and how they overcome their challenges. I feel like for people listening who are living with an invisible condition, that gives them the opportunity to be seen and to feel less alone.
And that's what it's about, is to feel less alone and to be seen. The lofty vision of this project is to end the stigma. And I know it's going to take a lot of us to do it. And there's a couple ways to end the stigma. One is to educate ourselves. So I took it upon myself to build one of the most comprehensive databases of invisible conditions. It's up on my website. It's not just a list, there's lots of lists out there, but definitions, online resources, online support groups, and example accommodations. So it's educate ourselves. We all have that capacity. And another way to end the stigma is through sharing our stories. And not everyone's comfortable sharing their story. And I get that. And you don't have to share your story. For me, sharing my story has allowed me to embrace who I am. I tell people that this is my normal. I'm missing a lot of my intestine through multiple surgeries. The day we're recording this is the day that my arthritis decided to flare, and I almost hit the floor in excruciating pain as I'm walking my kids to school. But you can't see it. So for me, being able to openly express that this is part of who I am, I live with this, I didn't choose this. One of my guests had said, it's like, it doesn't pay rent. It's just an uninvited guest that is stuck here. So I've embraced it, and it doesn't define me, but it's part of my story. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And I've heard that from so many people. I heard from one guest on my show who ended up quitting a job because she didn't want to share it with her workplace. And in retrospect, it wasn't the right move, but there's so much stigma. And I love that the title of your podcast, that stuckness, and feeling stuck when it comes to our health conditions.
I think you are touching on, in my opinion, one of the biggest ways that, and I'll speak for myself, that I, as a person living with an invisible condition, can get stuck. And I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I have Hashimoto's, which is a autoimmune disease of the thyroid. And then I also have arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, which impacts the joints. But I think one of the biggest places in my experience that I get stuck is the vulnerability piece. In that there is, and I don't know if it's from stigma or just societal expectations, but in particular with the arthritis, when I was first diagnosed, there was almost like I was afraid to tell people because I was afraid of being judged. Like I wanted to move through life putting on a happy face so that people wouldn't think any differently of me. And it is a very vulnerable experience to tell someone, whether it is a friend or a family member or a colleague, that you are living with a condition that impacts the way that you move through your life, however that may be. And, for some time after my diagnosis, it was very challenging for me to talk about how I actually felt. I got stuck in the response of, "How are you?" "I'm good. Things are good." And I was stuck there because I felt afraid to say, "Actually, I'm really struggling. Arthritis is painful. I woke up this morning and I couldn't put my shoes on because my feet hurt so badly that couldn't get them to slip on." That's a vulnerable thing to share. And again, I think the importance of what you're doing with the Invisible Condition podcast is that when we share our stories like that, as you mentioned, not everyone is comfortable sharing that story. But if someone shares that story, then another person experiencing it can see themselves in it, and it lessens the shame, it lessens the stigma, and we can become more vulnerable and open about the things that we are actually going through.
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank you for opening up and with me and your audience. And I know you've shared before with your audience, just opening up and sharing the conditions you live with, and just not just about the conditions. It's how sometimes those conditions make you feel. I don't think we talk a lot about that, right? You said something that I completely agree with is, "How are you?" "Good." "How are you?" "Good." And it's just I don't know if it's a North American thing or where it's just a greeting. It's not even an actual question. We don't care. And I'll be blunt with that. How often do we actually have the time to care about that question? If I saw you on the street and I said, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And you paused and you looked at me and you unloaded, do I have that capacity to take that on? I would encourage listeners to think about that, but I would also encourage people to answer it honestly because you never know what that connection is going to be like. Vulnerability takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of trust. And often, I don't know about you, but for me, we have one or two stories of that discrimination and it just makes us want to shut down. And I've got numerous ones. One where a senior leader in an organization heard that I was in the hospital through just before a Christmas break and asked me about it. So I shared. And partway through the conversation, like I was protecting it and protecting myself, and they wanted to know more. So I felt open to share. And partway through the conversation, they just said, "That's way too much information, Tim," and walked away. And I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'm not gonna share anymore." And I've had people say, "But you don't look sick. Are you sure? Why don't you just get more sleep? You should exercise more. You're looking thin. You should eat more. You look like you put on weight. You should exercise more." The words we use have an impact. And guess what? We all have the capacity and the ability to control the words we use. We all do. It takes work. Pause, count to 3. Think about the words you're going to say. Are they adding value or are they self serving? Often people don't have ill intent. I truly believe that, but it lands with stigma and with bias. So taking that pause, thinking about the impact that's going to cause someone, whether it's with friends, whether it's in the workplace, even with ourselves, that self talk. Like you said, I want to put on a happy face. I want to not break plans with friends. I want to fill in the blank. It starts with even that self talk because if we get into that pattern, we're going to be stuck.
I would argue that for me, that is one of, if not the biggest place where I get stuck with my invisible condition, which is that self talk. Living with an invisible condition brings its own challenges, but I have a tendency to exacerbate those challenges by the stories I tell myself about my condition and how I'm feeling and how I'm showing up. The self criticism when I have to cancel a plan, the acceptance when I try to do something that I used to be able to do very easily, and maybe it looks a little different now. Maybe it's not as easy or as fun. So, again, I have rheumatoid arthritis. And about a year after I was diagnosed, I was snowboarding. I went snowboarding up at a mountain near me, which is something that I have done many times before and have always enjoyed. But that day, my arthritis was flaring up and it just was not happening. I just couldn't get the boots on, too much pain. And I remember I sat at this bench by the lodge and I just cried because I was telling myself this story that arthritis was going to take this away from me, that snowboarding was no longer something that I could do. And I got so stuck in the story. And the poor people sitting at the other side of the bench, they were so nice, but I was like an absolute wreck. And so that self talk is really important, showing ourselves compassion and trying not to spiral into worst case scenarios and just taking the things that we're experiencing at face value and dealing with them in the moment without projecting too far into the future.
Yeah, self compassion. It's a fairly easy word to say, but often a hard thing to put into practice. And I don't know why. I don't know why we do that to ourselves, where we almost, I don't know if you agree with this, but a thought that's coming in my mind is we almost self impose stigma on ourselves. We self impose that people won't understand. I should be able to do more. What if we reframe that to say, I am able to do more? Maybe just not right now. I am not my condition. So please don't think of me as that. I've met someone who also lives with Crohn's, and she was telling me that she was going to go for a walk with someone. Somebody wanted to go for a walk, and she said yes, and just riddled with anxiety. What if I need to use the washroom? There's no washrooms on our walk. Maybe I should just cancel. And we worked through that a little bit to say, what if you just reframed it and said, hey, I'm not doing right now. I really want to see you. Do you mind coming over for a cup of tea instead? So there's different ways that I think we can reframe things with our friends, with our family, but even with ourselves. I'm starting something big and scary. The day we're recording this, the day before recording this, I sat through orientation, a master's program. I've had a dream to do a master's program for as long as I can remember. And I found every reason and excuse and thing to not pursue it. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, what if I get sick? What if I can't participate? What if? To the point where I feel it in my anxious gut is now bothering me. What if we reframe that to, what if I don't get sick? Or what if I do get sick? What tools do I have to advocate for myself? For me, it was that, okay, what if I get sick? Hard stop. Now it's, okay, what if I get sick? Like I just said, what tools do I have to advocate for myself? Who can I talk to? What can I do? Do I think this is going to be long term? Do I need to reduce stress? Do I need to reduce some work? What do I need to do in order to get to that place where out of that pre-crisis state and build that resilience?
And I love those reframes because those are empowering. So instead of being so focused on the stuckness that you can't see possibilities, it's an acceptance of the reality, but then figuring out, what do I need to do to get myself unstuck in this situation? Whether it is changing my environment, changing my diet, changing the people I surround myself with, whatever the case may be. But that's action oriented. Like that gives us the opportunity to take steps, whatever those steps may be, big or small, towards feeling our best.
Yeah, there's a model that I created quite some time ago and I've adapted it over time, and it's around resilience. One definition that I've used about resilience is being able to bounce back to that pre-crisis state. If you're in that crisis, you've got multiple opportunities, multiple things that you could do, directions you could go, things going through your head. But if we think about resilience as that bouncing back to the pre-crisis state and using a model of, it's very simple: reflect, reframe, and reach out. Just reflect, just take a pause. I don't know about you, but if I'm feeling stress, I just try to get everything done and then nothing gets done. Taking a pause, going for that walk, looking at our situation and looking back at all the tough times we've gone through without judgment. That's the key, without judgment. What have these experiences taught you? What have these experiences taught me? And how have I managed to bounce back out of those experiences? Reframe it. Okay, so something's happened. Maybe you're going through a flare up. Maybe you're not able to go snowboarding. Maybe you've got some need to disclose at the workplace or whatever that is. How do you reframe that, which we just talked about? So redefine this and then reach out. That's been a common theme for people on my show. And I've done over 40 episodes now, where building that community of people, that one person, 10 people that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm stuck. I'm going through a crisis. I don't know how to get out of this. Having somebody on speed dial, if we still use our phones to phone people or to text people, being able to reach out to someone. So reflect, reframe, and reach out. That's just a model that's stuck in my mind.
I love that model. And I agree that the reach out element is so critical. Really, with anything that you're going through in life, community and support is essential. But having that community and support when you're navigating something like an invisible condition is invaluable. There are so many different ways to go from stuck to unstuck. But one of the most productive, learning. Learning something new can help you expand your skill set and find new interest, and in the process, help you get unstuck. And if you want to learn something new, you will definitely want to check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes designed to help you learn, grow, and tap into your creativity, all of which can help you make the journey from stuck to unstuck. And right now, Skillshare is offering a free month to new members. If you want to access Skillshare's entire library of classes and get the education and instruction you need to shake off the stuckness, just visit seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare and sign up for your free trial today. Again, that's seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare. To your point earlier, when you were talking about your experience with your colleague, asking you about your surgery, and then saying that you were offering too much information when you were being honest. So I think that exact scenario is a big fear that a lot of people have in being vulnerable, that they will in some way be rejected in their vulnerability when they talk about their invisible condition. So, in your experience, your conversations, chatting with all of these people, A, what are the most effective ways to reach out in order to get the support that we need? And B, how do we discern who is a safe person to reach out to and who is going to embrace us in our vulnerability and give us real support versus maybe people who won't understand and won't give us the kind of response that is going to make us feel better?
Those are two very big, loaded questions. And I think I would preface that with there will be people who just won't understand, who will tell you that's too much information, who will tell you, I don't care. There's going to be people out there. And if we accept that and know that, I think it's going to be a little bit easier. But also knowing that it's not because of us, it's because of them. It's not on me that they've chosen to be ignorant. It's on them. And that's a person that is maybe not worth investing in, but maybe that's a family member. Maybe that's a close friend. And I think it really comes down to understanding why you want to share. What's that driver? What are your core values? What is that deep reason inside of you to be vulnerable, to share? I've heard stories of, I just want to be able to help one person by sharing my story. I've heard stories from people who say, hey, I need to share my story because if I don't, I will no longer be on this earth. So I need to keep talking about it. So when you think of that, I would do some introspection before even starting to share. Why is this so important? For me, my core values, a few of my values are my faith, my family, my community, and curiosity. If I don't understand my core values, I might not know why I want to share, but I need to share for those 4 values. And maybe it takes a few prompted questions even to understand your core values is, what are some of the moments you've been the happiest and why? How do you usually deal with conflict, whether it's real or perceived? Just unpack the action words that are coming out of those. And you know what? Most of my guests have said, one guest, Alicia, another, Chris, many guests have said, most people aren't mean, aren't malicious, and aren't out to get you. You know, Alicia DeSantis had said this. She's constantly reminding herself, I'm reading this, that ignorance doesn't equal maliciousness. Failure to recognize disabilities creates the opportunity for education and empathy. So if we approach it like that, you will find people that just don't understand what Hashimoto's is. Heck, most people don't know what a thyroid is. My mom lives with Graves' disease. I know what that is, and I know what it can do to the body, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. So it's an opportunity to educate and get curious. I feel like I'm making you feel uncomfortable right now. What's coming up for you? Hey, why don't you care? Hey, what can I send you to help you understand what I'm going through? Again, most people don't have that ill intent, but I think it's so important to focus there, start there, that introspection, why you want to share the values, understanding that most people don't have ill intent, and then educate yourself, right? Learn as much as you can about your condition, how it affects you and impacts you, because what you're going to find online is very generic. If you research Crohn's disease, you're going to get everything from don't eat specific things to this is the diet you need to eat to iron deficiency to severe intestinal issues. For me, it's very specific. So educate yourself because then it gives you an opportunity to educate others. I was working for a company. My Crohn's disease came out of remission, ended up in the hospital. with an abscess, which is basically a leak in my intestine. My boss, my CEO, didn't know that. So I phoned him up on a Monday and said, "Hey, I'm actually in the hospital. I can't come to work." And we got to talking. He asked what was wrong, and I told him I've got Crohn's. He texted me later the next day and said, "I actually didn't know what Crohn's was. So I spent a couple hours last night researching what Crohn's was. And now I have a better understanding. When you get back to work, we're going to work on reducing your stress because I want to keep you out of the hospital. How does that sound?" And he followed through. Like he actually followed through. That is because I educated myself. I approached it because I didn't think he had ill intent and he didn't. And then on the receiving end, he thanked me for that. So there's just a couple thoughts right there.
I have so many things that I want to say. But first of all, what an incredible boss. Like, what a empathetic, connected way to respond to that situation with an employee. I wish that more business owners, managers took that approach. But you touched on a couple of things that I found really interesting. Number one, I love that you tied it back to values because that really resonated with me on a deep level. My core values are authenticity and connection. And by sharing my story, I feel like it allows me to be more authentic and that it allows me to more deeply connect with people in my life. Like when I'm doing the hi, how are you? I'm good, great kind of situation, it creates a disconnect because I'm not being fully truthful. I'm saying one thing, but I'm experiencing another. And that creates distance, which is antithetical to my value, which is connection. So that is a nugget I really enjoyed and I'm going to take with me. And then I also loved the piece about thinking about other people's intentions, that oftentimes people don't intend to respond to you in a way that might not feel great. I am a very sensitive person. I have a tendency to take things personally sometimes, but oftentimes it is just a lack of knowledge, of education, of even knowing what to say or how to respond. And I think bringing empathy to that conversation and addressing it in a way that doesn't shame the other person or make them feel bad for not understanding your condition or what you're going through, I feel like is a much better approach to get what it is that we want, which is that support and that understanding. So I also really love that approach. One more thing that I also was thinking of when you were talking is this idea of like holding space. So, in the sense that it's important to me to share how I'm really feeling. It's important for me to let the people closest to me in on my experience and what it's like to live with an invisible condition and when I'm having a flare up and how that's impacting my day to day. But I've also found that for me, it's really important to be considerate of how and when I share that information. Because, for example, my husband is the closest person to me. He is the person that I am telling the most about how I feel most often. But also, there have been times where I have burst into his room and just been like, oh my God, this is how I feel, and da da da, and I don't feel good and I'm hurting. And it was just not the time for him to receive that. Like it was like almost overwhelming, or he wasn't in the headspace to process. And I think that those situations can sometimes bring feelings of rejection. As I've moved through my invisible conditions over the past few years, something that I have found to be very helpful is before I really get into the nitty gritty of what's going on with me and how I'm feeling, is asking people if they have space for that in that moment. Hey, having a really hard day, do you have maybe 10 or 15 minutes where I could vent a little bit? And then that gives them the opportunity to be like, okay, I need to make myself available and really be here to listen. Or it gives them the opportunity to say, hey, actually, I am right in the middle of this thing. I want to give you the attention that you need. Can you give me 30 minutes and then we'll meet in the kitchen and talk? And I feel like that has opened up a dialogue about
living with my invisible condition and living with arthritis, living with Hashimoto's in a way that's respectful to both me and the people in my life. And I've just found that to be like a really helpful approach.
Oh, I love that so much. There's a couple things jumping out at me is just the level of self-awareness in that.
Thanks, therapy.
So there you go. In this episode, you've got multiple hours of therapy in a short amount of time, but just that level of self-awareness, and that self-awareness might not seem intuitive to that conversation, but it's taking yourself out of the conversation, taking yourself out of the center of that conversation just for a moment. I'm guilty of it, right? I will often walk upstairs out of my home office. My wife's upstairs, maybe with her kids or prepping something for dinner, or she's working on her own thing. And I'll get up and I'll just start spewing to her. And she'll often look at me and just point to her headphones and she's got her AirPods on. But just that self-awareness of, okay, is this the right time? Is the timing right? What do I want to get out of this conversation? Do I want someone to just listen and not give advice? My wife and I do something not as often as we probably should. More my fault. It's, hey, is this a listening conversation or do you want me to weigh in on this? It's like, hey, do you want me to just hold some space for you just to vent? And I'll even preempt a conversation where, hey, I just need to vent about something. And that's it. Like, we don't need solutions or anything. I just want to get this off my chest. But even just being able to pick and choose what to share, what those moments are, because you don't want to lay on hours and hours of something on somebody's shoulders and then just walk away and go, well, now I feel good, but now somebody else is carrying your burden. That's where that self-awareness comes in and being able to have that real conversation. So I love that. I love that you went there and you shared that.
That is 100% my goal. I never want to leave a conversation with me feeling better and the other person feeling worse. And I think there's also an element of, obviously, when you're the one living with the invisible condition, the impact is very present for you. And because you're the one experiencing it, it can be easy, and I'll only speak for myself, but for me, it can be easy to forget that also impacts the people close to me. Again, I'll use my husband as an example. When he sees that I'm hurting, he hurts too. He is hurting for me and for my experience. And so being, I love your term, self-aware and intentional about how I talk about these things and being mindful of not only my own experience and feelings, but the person that I'm talking to has been like a really important, helpful piece, I think.
Yeah, we don't talk enough about caregivers. Some spouses don't like that term. My wife is okay with that term. For years, she was my caregiver, where she was responsible for absolutely everything, and I was responsible for napping. That's what I did. But thinking about that burden or that weight somebody else is carrying. So maybe I'm feeling unstuck now because I've unloaded. But now if I pass that baton, pass the torch to somebody else. And so it's just so important just to check in with each other. How are we doing? Making that space, making that time. I don't know how many times I hear from people and friends and family but oh, we're just so busy. Okay, well, often that busyness is a choice. So we've chosen to be busy. So we've chosen to fill up our calendars with things and stuff. But are we choosing to fill in our calendars with that genuine connection time? To just sit down and not just say, "How are you doing?" but just saying, "What's been going on today? How are things? How are you feeling?" Creating that space. And maybe you're listening to this and you don't have that someone. One of the easy answers and maybe a cop-out answer is just start journaling. Just, pick up a pen and paper. For me, that doesn't work. So what I do is, well, I launched a podcast. Honestly, it was just I record myself on my podcasting platform often and just don't release stuff because I just want to get it off my chest. And often it's if I can get it out of my head and onto something. I use another product. It's called vnote.ai. The letter V is in Victor, note.ai. It's a speech to text app. What I love about it, it's just tries to organize your thoughts. So I take it for a walk with me often. I just will say, hey, I just want to put a journal entry together and this is what I'm thinking. And it actually has a pretty intuitive AI question at the end. So you can actually ask it to ask you questions. And it will
Mm.
say, hey, what do you mean by this? Or, hey, this isn't connected to this. Let's unpack that a little bit. So it actually, I feel like I've gone for therapy without going for therapy. It's not really the intent of the app, but I found it's really been helpful. Just again, for me, this is what's worked for me is to get my thoughts out of my mind and out somewhere else.
Mm. I am going to be stealing that tip. I am a big journaler, but I often, because I'm similar, for me to process, I have to get it out of my head and onto another place where I can consume it. And generally for me, that means journaling. But sometimes I'm busy. I don't really have time to sit down for 30 minutes and journal. But I love the idea of having the app with you and you're just taking a walk or taking a drive and just being able to unload and then revisit those emotions later. Oh, I love that. I can't wait to download that.
Yeah, I think that's a tool. Just even that practice works for whether you're on a leadership journey or whether you're trying to understand self advocacy or you're practicing self awareness. Our default is to, I got to find somebody and tell them this. It's, okay, do I really need to tell them this? And yeah, you don't have to go through that selection criteria every single time, but sometimes just being able to get it out of our minds onto something, whether it's digital or physical, is incredibly helpful and gets us unstuck. And what I love about a product like this, there's lots of other products, there's lots of coaching tools out there, just to be able to ask those right questions. What do you mean by that? What would it take for you to move past that? Let's unpack that a little bit more. What are you feeling right now? Some coaching questions. And I've done coaching. I've been the recipient of coaching. I do coaching as well as a lot of mentoring. And it's just a dialogue, getting us to that place of unstuckness. And sometimes we don't have the answers. For some coaches, they will never interject something. For me, it's I will might if I have permission, I'll offer up some insight and offer up some advice or a different thought or a different direction.
I love that so much. So, we've talked a lot about the experience of living with an invisible condition, how that can sometimes make us feel stuck, and how to move through that stuckness. But what about for people who don't have an invisible condition, but love someone with an invisible condition? From your perspective, what are some ways that loved ones can support someone who is experiencing an invisible condition and maybe feeling stuck, whether that's in the emotions, in the symptoms, or whatever the case may be?
Oh, I love this. And when I saw this question, I got nervous because I live with someone who has an invisible condition and I'm guilty of, okay, well, it can't be that bad today. Or is it really? I might say it. I often don't say it, but I might think it. And so loving somebody with an invisible condition, again, it's going back to the core tenets of what makes you love this person. Our conditions don't define us. Our partner's conditions, those friends that live with something, their condition doesn't define them. When we think of it like that, I think it allows us to start reframing. And we talked about this earlier, is just reframing those conversations. When we love someone, whether it's a partner, a friend, a family member, I don't know about you, but I want to spend time with that person and not just, hey, let's go for a walk or let's go for a bike ride or let's go for food. It's what makes that person tick, what drives them. What maybe they're feeling stuck in something more than just their condition. Let's get curious. I love getting curious. And being curious is, I think it's twofold. One is authentically curious, and one is self serving curiosity. Authentically curious is that aspect of, I'm going to tune out everything around me to dive into what's happening right now. What can I learn? What can you tell me? And think of my wife who lives with a type of arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis. I know it comes with limitations. And I know some days she can come on a hike and go for a bike ride. And I know some days there's just no way that's going to happen. I know some days manifests as iritis and she can't drive. And therefore, I'm on driving duty. I need to stop what I'm doing and drive to appointments. And that's all good because I love her unconditionally. Sure, it's hard. Sure, it's challenging because I know she's been on the receiving end and she's gone on my podcast to tell me how hard it's been, where it's like, oh, this guy could just get off the couch. Why is he always napping? Heck, even my kids just the other day, just the day before recording this, I said, "Hey, we were playing a game," and I said, "Oh, there's going to be a big surprise, a prize for the winner." And my 7-year-old daughter said, "What is that, Dad? A nap?" And I'm known as a napping dad, but I know I haven't been the easiest person to live with myself. So there's that cliche of putting yourself in that other person's shoes. I put myself in my wife's shoes of, okay, here's a guy who's in constant pain, who needs constant appointments, constant iron infusions, you name it, who's on high dose steroids and making him manic, who's known as and was known as a cranky dad. Put yourself in those shoes. And I wasn't an easy person to live with by any stretch. And yet my wife's still by my side. She loves me and I do her as well.
Mm, I love that. I love love. It really is amazing when we find people, whether that is a romantic partner or a friend or a family member or someone close to us, where you can really have that love without conditions. Someone to love you through the hard times, to love you when you're not the best version of yourself, to love you no matter what.
Yeah, and my wife would say, and I'm putting words in her mouth, and I hope she's okay with that. When she listens back, she might write you a note and say, "No, he's wrong." But she's gone on my podcast and the Invisible Condition podcast and said, just because I loved him or love him doesn't mean I have to put up with it. And I will put him in his place. And she will. She'll put me in my place. She'll also, as a caregiver, say, time out. I need help. I need support. I don't have the bandwidth to carry this burden right now. Is there somebody else you can talk to, Tim? That's also part of love. It's not just the put up with it and not say anything. It's the, no, I need to take care of myself.
I think that boundaries are one of the most loving things that we can do for ourselves and for other people, whether in relation to an invisible condition or just in relation to relationships. Standing firm in how you will be treated, what you will tolerate, how much you can take on. I think that a lot of people, and this was certainly myself, had this idea that setting boundaries was like mean or harsh in some way, but really it's the most loving thing that you can do. Like your wife saying, I love you and I need help right now. Like we need to figure this out. Like that is not only taking care of you, but taking care of her, which then in turn takes care of the relationship.
Absolutely. It's just that being honest, whether I know we're talking about partners, but this also goes with friends. It almost goes back to full circle to what you said with you and your husband of, hey, I don't have time right now, but in 30 minutes we can talk. And somebody had said to me once that I'm not a sensitive person or I don't carry burden and it seems like I don't care. And for me, it was, no, I set up boundaries. I let things in and I let things sit on the surface. So if somebody might be unloading something on me, which I love hearing from people. That's why I love being a podcast host, is I just love hearing stories. But it's also being able to separate yourself from that story and saying, this isn't my burden to carry, but I've got a ton of empathy and compassion and I'm right there with you. But this is something that I'm here to support you with and I can help you with, but it's not mine to carry. And that might sound harsh. Somebody might listen to this and go, oh, that's not the definition of empathy. But we have to look at ourselves as well, whether you're living with an invisible condition or not. Because if you carry everybody's burden, you will live with something that's invisible. You will have high stress, high anxiety, maybe even some depression. There's a huge mental and cognitive load to listening and carrying that story. Doesn't mean don't share, but it means you have to practice. That I don't want to use self-awareness again, but that's the word that comes to mind is you have to practice that and be able to separate yourself from that story.
Mm. Tim, I feel like you have shared so much wisdom and insight and supportive like tips and strategies for navigating stuckness with an invisible condition. Just to kind of, I love to give actionable tips and like wrap things up in a bow for listeners. So, from your perspective, if someone is listening, they're living with an invisible condition and they're feeling really stuck, what are your top pieces of advice for them on how to navigate that stuckness?
Oh, I'd go back to just thinking about that resilience, that reframe, reflect, and reach out. If you are stuck, if you're living with something that's not apparent and you're stuck, maybe you don't know how to advocate for yourself. Maybe you need to disclose in the workplace and are freaking out about that. Maybe you're diagnosed with something and you don't want to tell your friends or your family or your partner. Spend some time and some introspection as to what's holding you back. What is it? What's that blocker? Maybe find someone that's a neutral party. Reach out to me. I give way too much of my time, but I love hearing story and I love not just hearing the story, but I love to help people move past that. Find someone who's just going to ask a couple questions without judgment, maybe without that bias. I think that's where somebody would really need to start with is what that introspection, what's holding you back, finding someone to help you navigate that. Somebody that you trust maybe, or somebody who's a coach, somebody who's a mentor. Maybe you're in the workplace and maybe it's an HR person who's going to help you ask or help ask the right questions to get you move past that stuckness.
Mm, Such incredible tips and insights. Tim, this conversation has been amazing. Here at Season of Stuck, as we near the end of the interview, there are just a few more questions that we tend to ask. So if it's okay with you, I just have a few more questions for you.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, first question, thinking about the ideal future version of you, like the Tim that you are working every day to one day grow into. If he could travel back in time and talk to the current version of you, what advice do you think he would give you on how to navigate stuckness at this point in your life?
Oh, wow. Future Tim would tell current Tim that the stress you're putting on yourself through that self dialogue is pointless. It's not serving you. It's causing your guts to hurt when they don't need to hurt. So stop that self talk, embrace the season you're in. It might go horribly wrong, it might go horribly right, but it's just a data point in this life that you're living. That's what future Tim would say.
Mm, Thank you, future Tim. Current Deanna also needed to hear that. So I am very grateful.
I love that because I needed to hear that myself. And I'm going, oh, I could relax a little bit. That's a great question.
So I actually did an episode on the concept of future self. And I have found that tapping into this kind of ideal future version of ourselves can help us find so much insight in the present. I ask myself questions like that often. What would future Deanna say in this situation? And it really helps me adjust my thoughts, my behaviors, my actions in a way that's aligned with where I'm trying to go. And I find it super helpful.
Love it. It's such a great question. And it's
Thank
such a
you.
great thinking about that future self.
Mm.
I don't do it enough. So I'm definitely going to take that one away and re-listen to this.
Future Tim seems very wise, so you should definitely consult with him on a regular basis.
I love it.
Okay, the next few questions are just rapid fire. So I'm going to ask a question and you just say the first thing that comes to mind. Okay, favorite movie of all time?
School of Rock.
Oh, Jack Black is a national treasure. Protect him at all costs.
We just watched it as a family. I don't remember movies, so that's the first one that's on the top of my mind.
Ugh, I love him. Go to coffee order.
Oh, just a black coffee or an Americano. Maybe a splash of cream, depending if it's a certain coffee chain and their coffee makes me not feel good.
So good coffee is black. Maybe not so great coffee. Got to sweeten up the deal a little bit.
I just love a good Americano or just a drip coffee. Nothing, it can't have any sweetener in it at all. Zero.
Love it. If you could have any animal in the world as a pet, what animal would you have?
I'm laughing because this was a conversation around our dinner table just the day before recording this.
Oh my gosh, I love that. How funny.
I'd be okay with a dog or cat as long as I didn't have to take care of it.
They are a lot of work.
Yes. And my kids, when I ask who's going to clean up after the animal or the pet, they all point to me. And until that finger points back at them, there's not going to be a pet in our house. And my wife and kids will cry when they hear that. But yeah.
I will say, I have 2 dogs and no children. I do not understand how people have dogs and children. Like I cannot imagine adding a child to the care and connection and attention that my dogs need from me.
Yeah, my kids say, "But Dad, you walk a lot." Like I go for a morning walk and midday walk and an evening walk. And they're like, "You could just take the dog for a walk." I'm like, "No, but that's my time. That's my protected time." But I do like the idea of sitting on the couch in the evening, cuddling with an animal or having a cat perched on my desk and just hanging out. I love that idea. So my family needs to do some work on me in order to get me into a pet loving state.
I will say they are a lot of work, but they are the literal best thing in the world. I love my dogs more than anything and can confirm cuddling up with an animal on the couch is very fun.
Okay, I'll take your word for that. I don't know. I'm softening up to the idea. Let's just say that.
Okay, last question. What is the best concert you have ever been to?
Oh, that's a really good question. I love a band. They're not very well known. It's called Need to Breathe. And more kind of like indie rock. It's just, I've only seen them at small venues. And that's just what I love, that intimate small venue. But another band just popped in my mind. People might know it. The Roots played here in
Mm.
Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Many years ago, my wife and I went and just fell in love with their music, their style. I would say that was probably the most memorable show, just watching them improvise and just have fun. Like they were having fun. And that's, I left that concert thinking, whatever I do in life, I just want to have fun.
Mhm. Those are the best people to watch do anything really. Music, perform, just live life are the people who are doing their thing and having the best time doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe inwardly they're not, but outwardly, man, they're just living it. And I know it's a lot of work to hone in on that craft. And I think maybe that's why you and I do our craft as well. Podcast is often it's not, we don't do it to necessarily pay the bills. At least I don't, but it's an outlet and it's fun. And it's an opportunity to dive into something that we both enjoy.
Mm, I agree. It really is fun.
Yeah, it is.
Tim, again, thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful that we got to have this conversation. I know you mentioned invisiblecondition.com. Is that the best place for people to connect with you and learn more about Invisible Condition and your podcast?
Yeah, the website's a great place to go. I'm on all major streaming platforms, specifically Apple and Spotify. You can search the Invisible Condition podcast. You'll find it there. Many episodes. If you don't know where to start at the beginning, bounce around, record with guests, as well as record under 10-minute solo shows, just my random thoughts. It's almost, I call it journal entries. It's the public having a glimpse into what's going on in my brain. But also connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Tim Reitsma, Reitsma, and connect with me there. So yeah, if you are feeling stuck, reach out. If you have a story to share, reach out. If you just want to connect, because I'm sure you're doing something awesome and cool, connect. I'd love to have a conversation with anyone and everyone.
Mm, amazing. Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guest for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna DeBera, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.